Welcome to the CG Pro podcast. This is episode 41 with Norman Wang. If you enjoy today, you can follow us at becomecgpro.com or join our Facebook group. So, I'd love to introduce Norman, our guest today. Norman is the founder and CEO of Glassbox Technologies, who make all sorts of wonderful technology to help support the virtual production industry. And we're going to get into a conversation about a lot of that. But Norman, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure. Well, so I know a little bit about you, but I would love to hear a little bit about your journey to this point. I know that you've spent time in academia and some other companies. How did you? Were there some early inspirations that kind of led you in the direction of film and technology? How did it kind of start for you?
So I came from a video games background, actually. So my academic career has been around interactive technologies and kind of researching how the effects of technology kind of influences human perception. So that's kind of where I came from. And that was sort of the gateway to virtual production, which is through virtual reality. And my speciality at the time really is around like performance capture. So we worked with really early integrations into game engine. So we help bringing all kinds of different tools and equipment into the Unreal Engine. So at the time, it was Unreal 3. So we built a lot of the technology integration at the time. And then afterwards, what really sort of got us into virtual production was actually an opportunity we had with Google. So we helped Epic and Google integrate the Project Tango tablet, if you remember those things.
I do, yeah.
Yeah, so that integration was done in collaboration with Google, Epic, and us at the time. So
cool.
One of the chief application for that was actually basically augmented reality and virtual cameras. So being able to use the augmented reality device to kind of navigate virtual environments and things like that. So at the time, we didn't even really, like the word virtual production didn't even really cross our radar. And it was really after we started working with some of the people that are more directly involved in the production aspect, pre-visualization, visualization, and to sort of onset visualization, that we became a part of this virtual production ecosystem. So this would have been back in about 2015.
So going back even further than that, you mentioned studying, and what did you study before you got into that line of work, before you got into video games and development in real time?
So what I did in university was basically computer science and interactive multimedia. So I knew at that time, I had this ambition of kind of telling a story that could only be told in an interactive medium. Like to this day, it's still something, somewhat of a passion of mine, to kind of play very interesting video games that tell stories in very interesting ways. And I was very excited when things like these sort of interactive shows started to come around, where like I think it's sort of like the collision between linear narrative and non-linear narrative. So yeah, that's kind of being what's driving a lot of things that I do, and being coming from like a technical background, it really helps understand, I think, that sort of bridge the artistic intent as well as sort of the underlying technical foundations, like the things that makes it possible.
Right. No, I resonate with that a lot. I kind of got into visual effects through VJing, and my ambition as a VJ, instead of spending a lot of time with abstract visuals in front of DJs, was trying to tell stories in that medium as well. It's tricky, but no, it's some good experiments with it. So what led you to sort of know that that's what you wanted to study even? Were there some earlier experiences that pointed you in that direction?
So I originally, when I was picking what I'm going to major in for college, I actually initially I wanted to go into astrophysics, because that's been sort of an interest of mine for a very long time. But then I played a video game called The Knights of the Old Republic.
Mm.
And I'm not even really a Star Wars fan. I know this is like blasphemy for a lot of people, but
We can bleep
um,
that out. Okay.
but at the time, I played that game, and and what captivated me was that it was a story that really could only ever be told in an interactive medium, because you as a player had choice and influence over the direction of the story, about over the events of the story. So that was what kind of really fascinated me about the medium, and that's also what prompted me to kind of want to study video games. Um, but yeah, then after my academic times, I realized, well, me and a group of friends, we realized game development is a very unusual kind of business. It's very difficult to kind of make a business case for making a game. It's difficult to quantify and objectively, like, what makes something fun.
Mm.
And what we ended up doing a lot was kind of, we started doing odd jobs, building technologies using game engines, or building tools and whatever using game engines that are not games. And then one thing led to another. We realized this kind of side job that we were doing to like fund our primary job was much more, was actually kind of turning into its own thing. Um, and that's what got us involved with NASA. That's what got us involved with Project Tango, and that's what got us involved with like technology integration into the Unreal Engine, and that's the bridge to virtual production for us.
Right. It makes sense. Yeah. So it sounds like you was following a lot of your own curiosities and seeing where they went, but you had a strong sense of what you enjoyed.
I think it's kind of like, because when people working on the cutting edge, I'm sure this is the same for everybody that are sort of involved in creating things that sort of didn't exist before. Um, is that you don't really know where you're going, but you have a rough idea of where you want to end up. So
Yeah.
there's a goal in the distance, but the path to get there is not clear. So, but it's also that you can't just go explore in a random direction without a sense of what it is you're trying to achieve. So I think you do have to balance both things.
Right. Yeah. Like trying to set sail and look for the West Indies and accidentally finding America.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, you need to kind of have an idea where you're going, even though you don't necessarily know how to get there, right?
Yeah.
You can't just like set sail and just like, I'm going to sail in a random direction, and you're just going to end up lost at sea.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And following, so early on, I guess, did you feel like you absolutely knew you wanted to get into interactive technologies and games? Did that feel like a pretty confident decision?
I think sort of being, as a kid, kind of getting out of high school, getting into college, and kind of choosing what it is that you want to do. I think at the time, it really was sort of like follow your passion sort of thing. Um, because I think at the time I was fairly confident that whichever direction I choose, I'm going to end up somewhere that I want to be.
Mm.
And for me, it was always like, as long as you're okay with the consequences, just and dive head on in and give it 100% of your time and effort. Um, that's always been kind of how I approach everything.
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear about, because I think, there's a lot of different people listen to this, and people who are already well into their careers, or some people who aren't. And I remember thinking back to my early days. It's very confusing when you're being asked by grown-ups, like, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? It feels like so much pressure to do that. But instead of that, thinking about the following your intuition and following your passion and being curious, and it sounds like good advice.
Yeah, I think this applies to a lot of different things. I think being able to kind of keep sight of what you want to do, and while being open to explore and make mistakes, and be okay with making mistakes. But most importantly, learning from the mistakes so that you don't repeat them in the future, right? So
Yeah.
um, I think that's been like a really valuable guiding principle for myself.
Like, yeah, it's it's confusing sometimes. I think you can feel like you made the right decision, and then you get into something, you're like, this is really hard. I'm not sure, I'm not sure, is this the right thing? But something pulls you through. Something keeps pulling you through those challenges. What for you gives you the indication that you're following something in one of those really difficult moments where everything's going wrong, but you still feel like you need to keep going?
Um, that's a really good question. I think it's a combination of two things. Like coming from academia, it's really interesting because when we the perspective I have of academia is that almost every problem has been kind of some aspect of it has been tackled in the past. So in academia, we really spend a lot more time looking up and trying. We have a saying, a good idea gets rediscovered every 10 years and gets
Mm,
reinvented every 20 years. And that's because like usually you have something that happens in the past. Maybe the technology wasn't quite there. Maybe like the sort of the environment and the surrounding circumstances wasn't quite right for that idea to be fully explored. Maybe it wasn't quite accepted or something like that. But then the more people kind of try to tackle the same problem, they will rediscover the same solution, even if it was an incomplete one. And everybody contributes to make it a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. So it's like an incremental thing.
mm,
Um, like we talk about like an overnight success, like 10 years in the making, right? Like a revolutionary, groundbreaking like piece of academic work is always built on foundations of countless minds that preceded them. So the first part is like, I think the first thing that helps me get across these really difficult times is sort of the humility in knowing that we are probably not the first person to encounter these things. Maybe
mm.
we're the first person trying to do this very specific combination of things. But if we take it apart, I'm sure we can find solutions elsewhere, maybe in an unrelated field of people who have encountered this problem in the past and have a solution for it, and that we can learn from it and we can borrow from it. So that's like, so number one, the humility to say what we're doing is not 100%, is not totally new, and there are things that we can learn from and people we can learn from. And the second, I think, is almost not quite the blind confidence in that you can do everything, right? But it's sort of that, oh, that sort of confidence built on past experience to say
Mm.
we can overcome this. This is not an insurmountable problem. And I think having that sort of that humility and knowing that you're not the first person to encounter this issue, and then sort of that confidence that nothing is sort of unsolvable. Um, I think that combination is what gets us through some of the most difficult times.
Right. No, that's really interesting. Yeah, because they're kind of inevitable, really, in any endeavor. You're going to come across things that are hard, and then there's things that you don't know about yet that are really hard. And um, yeah, it's really interesting to hear your perspective on that. Now, being around, do you put like examples of things that you've accomplished around you just to like remind you that yeah, I solved that one. It means I could solve this one as well.
Um, I think to an extent, and I think that the Tango project for me was really sort of a personal turning point for myself and the team involved, because it was really, really difficult, right? Like we were dealing with integration with the technology that is experimental, even for the people that are making it. We had to pull together many, many pieces of disparate technologies. Like it needed to go through 4 different like languages to even make it happen, right? Android is on Java, and Unreal is in C++, and then there is like a like kind of internal processing thing that we needed to do to communicate between all the different services on the device. And we weren't like a mobile centric developer prior to that point, so it was it wasn't so much a learning curve as like there's just a cliff and that we had to scale that cliff. And um, so that was kind of I think where it all crystallized. Like we had to go and find literature and past and sort of things that people have done in other areas and really quickly become proficient in that space. And once it's done, it's sort of like looking back is like I really don't think anything that we've encountered since was really anywhere near as difficult as that project.
Right.
So it was kind of like you said, we were able to like do that, so why couldn't we do this?
So you kind of think about that sometimes when you have challenges, think like, wow, that was really tough. This isn't as tough, so we can do it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. It's like
that's cool.
we climbed that hill, so this hill is clearly not as tall as that one, so we should be able to climb it as well.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. But how about the people that you have around you? How because to make really complex things and solve complex problems, you need a good team. How do you approach having and finding and keeping a good team around you to accomplish these things?
I think people really is much more is a much more complicated problem than technical problems. I think
Right.
in a lot of ways, um, because I think humans we don't have like a single thing that we want to do. There's this complex interplay of motivations and so on. And different people want different things. So for us, it really is a matter of, I think, providing as engaging an experience working so that people actually wants to work, and sort of making sure that they're properly supported in being able to do the things that they're doing is very important for us. And COVID brought around some changes to organization as well. Like right now, we're almost a fully remote team with people in 7 different countries. Um, and yeah, and one of the things that we realized is that we have now turned into what we call kind of like a V-shaped organization. So we have more seniors than we have mid-level people, and we have more mid-level people than we have junior people.
Right.
So what that brought for us is kind of these sort of very elite driven development cycle. So rather than kind of so something that we noticed in the past when we were a little bit more like a traditional organization where we had like like an even mix of senior, mid-level, and juniors, we realized what happens a lot of the time is that the senior people turn kind of into managers
Yeah.
and or sort of like problem solvers for people that are not as experienced. And a problem that they could potentially solve inside of 15 minutes, they end up spending like 2 hours trying to like sort it out for somebody else. And like that's not necessarily a bad thing because that allows people who are less experienced to become experienced in the process. But what we found is that it seems to be more like it works for us a little bit better to kind of cultivate like individual specializations, um, while not cutting off that ability for people to ask for help. But we've also found that being remote also actually promotes a bit more independence in people.
Mm.
Because like in the past, like we've seen people who like they run to um, something that they couldn't quite solve, and their first instinct is to, oh, this person is available, I'm going to ping them and ask for help. And when we're all in like a physical office together, someone will just like walk over to a desk and like tap someone on the shoulder. But what we found is that when we're a bit more remote, when we're all working from home, it fosters more independent problem solving.
Mm.
Because like maybe if you just persevere for another 5 minutes, you will find a solution to this. Maybe it's the answer a lot of time is just one Google away. And by being more independent, you actually end up spending more time developing your problem solving skill rather than relying on other members of the team. Not to say that if you really hit a brick wall, that we also make sure that we have as much of that collaborative atmosphere as possible, that we make it a policy that everyone's always available to answer any questions for anybody.
Mm.
But yeah, being more independent also means you learn better, I think. You develop better professionally, but it also frees up availability for people to spend more time focusing on what they're doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, like the pandemic has brought about some very interesting change and to kind of the way we work and our work culture. But I think it has been strictly positive in that sense.
That's great. It's really interesting. I know there's somewhat of a debate going on at the moment as to whether it has been positive, and it's probably different for different companies and different people. But I felt similarly as well. I love that book, and if you read it, Deep Work by Cal Newport. It's about basically about exactly that, being able to have enough time and focus to be able to innovate, to create something meaningful, to create something new, and not just do administrative type smaller tasks. You need time to be able to focus on that, and those big open plan offices are not really conducive to that because of the amount of disruption, essentially.
I think yeah, it definitely depends on I think it depends on the industry, it depends on the people, depending on what it is that they do. But for us, um, I think what that worked out really well, and we're experimenting with an approach that is really spearheaded by our German team, which is
Mm,
what we call a manager as assistants, because like processes and bug reports and all those things are still very important to do, but a lot of the time um, we found that people don't really like doing them. It's very rare. Right, like I don't think anyone really gets off on writing a report. It's like, this is going to be the best bug report I have ever written. But
Nobody likes
some
TPS reports. No.
yeah, but some people like that, right? But so what we're experimenting at the moment is to have basically like a dedicated kind of engineering manager whose job is to basically write those reports, write the like. So if we were to kind of benchmark a particular bill against another bill, we need to kind of have data for how is this better, how is this worse, blah blah blah, and these kind of things. We're now sort of trying to have people whose job is to write those reports rather than the engineers having to write it themselves. So these people will kind of fill in the document, will document the process and give it to the engineer to review. So they will be like, "Yeah, we did this. Yeah, that's correct. Yep, all that checks out. Cool." And that takes like 5 minutes of their time. Whereas like if you ask the engineer to write this report, it takes them hours and
Mm,
they make mistakes because this is not necessarily what they're good at.
right.
I know it's a part of their job for sure, and people have the professional kind of aptitude to say, even though I don't like doing this, it's part of my job to do this. But we also thought, well, what if we have somebody whose job is to do that, and we can take that load off of people's shoulders, and so that they can focus their frankly more valuable time doing more valuable stuff.
Right.
This is an interesting conversation. Like when I was a SIGGRAPH, so we kind of also met up a little bit at SIGGRAPH, I think, um, with a, with a we were sort of like the CTO of a very large kind of visual effects studio, and we kind of talked about sort of seniority being like not just a pyramid or a single ladder of seniority, but really more of like a grid. So we have like two dimensions. Like one dimension is sort of the capability, and the capability is really just measured by like how much of the stuff that they could do that nobody else can. So it's capability on one axis, and then the manageability on the other axis.
Mm,
So on this axis, we can kind of plot people who work differently. So someone that is very difficult to manage but has very strong technical competency. This is a prima donna, right?
yeah.
This is sort of your tech superstar that, and
The
the way
tech
you manage.
diva. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. These people that you kind of just give them the problem, and then they will solve it in kind of ingenious ways, but they don't like to be told what to do.
Mm,
And then you also have people who's not very good but very easy to manage. And these are the juniors that you can kind of farm off like simple tasks, like kind of um, doing like fixing low priority bugs, or doing like whatever issue that you might assign a junior person to do. So a lot of people can do it, but because these people are very self-driven, they take direction very well, they ask for feedbacks and et cetera, et cetera. So these people are really great kind of your sort of golden boy juniors on sort of the lower right side, and someone who is very manageable and also very capable is like your unicorn.
Right.
Like you hear about, you know what a unicorn looks like, you just never seen one in person.
Yeah.
And I think everybody sort of falls somewhere on that spectrum. And you really try to avoid the bottom left hand corner where people are neither good nor manageable, right? You sort of, you want people who are you're and even people who are very good but very difficult to manage. That may even be something you need to be very careful about.
Mm.
Um, we actually had a like when they said it's sort of an engineering wisdom in saying that it's harder to fix a problem than to create one. So if you're at your most clever when you cause a problem, how are you going to fix it?
Right.
So it really is. I think kind of over the last few years as we grew and shrunk and kind of evolved as a company, we kind of more. I think we now focus a little bit more on kind of how we work with people and how we manage people internally.
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, trying to help people focus on what they're good at, trying to um, have a good balance in the team as well. By the sounds of what you're saying, not having everybody be a certain type, because there is actually not that one's better. It's having a balance between them creates a kind of harmonious team. I was one of the last jobs that I had on a very small team doing a very difficult thing. It was only 15 people in total, and we were doing something incredibly complex, and there was almost no juniors, a very similar kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting paradigm and an interesting time to think about it. And yeah, interesting going through this time that we've all gone through, being kind of forced into being remote. I feel like engineers a lot of the time, they kind of just want to get on with what they're doing, and they've been freed up to do that a bit more by being able to be at home, unless they're stuck in the house and all the kids are in there as well.
Yeah, I think COVID has brought about a change for us that I think is welcome. Um, and it really helped us. Like we lost people, but
Mm,
we increased in productivity. And then that's something that we found was really really interesting, was that we just did more stuff than we did when we had a bigger team and
right.
had an office where everybody was together. And
Yeah.
it's just so bizarre to realize that we could lose headcount but gain productivity in the process. Um,
Do you
yeah,
attribute that more to focus?
I think focus and specialization.
Yeah.
Um, because I think over time the sort of people develop their own specializations to say this type of problems will be done, will be like this guy is the person that you go to for this type of problems. um, so if you really want to talk about like low level code optimization, you go talk to Yanis. But if you want something solved quickly in a really brute force way to just see if an idea is going to work, you go talk to Kyle. That sort of thing, right? Like we have people that have different styles of working, and then it's really about making sure that the right task gets assigned to the right people. Not to say that they couldn't do each other's tasks, but certain type of things, I think certain people have affinity to certain type of tasks. So being able to delegate correctly as well, I think, is also a really important part, like knowing the people that we work with better.
Right. And as for yourself, are you still hands on? Or do you find yourself more doing that kind of thing and dividing tasks and managing, or are you still hands on as an engineer as well?
Um, like I realize I shouldn't be hands-on as an engineer. Like from time to time, I help people fight spot fires,
Yeah.
but like I think if you're something like as a if you're a manager of a team and somehow like you're still contributing in an engineering sense, then I think something is kind of wrong.
Right.
Um, not to say that there are certain problems. Like I realize if even if I want certain things done, it is better that I spend that time writing up better specifications than necessarily like writing code.
Yeah.
Because we hire engineers specifically because they write code, and that's kind of what they're good at. And for me, I feel like it's really more important for me to be able to grasp high level concepts, be able to be onset and see the problem, and being able to distill it down into, okay, what kind of problems can we solve? Like what actually is the problem, right? Where is the inefficiencies in the process, in the workflow, and how can we potentially solve this technically? Because sometimes workflow issues, like we do a lot of consultation as well. And we realize a lot of the time the solution isn't necessarily technical. A
Right.
lot of the time the solution could be like you need more people or you need less people. There's too much of a diffusion of responsibility and you need to focus that onto like a single person. Um, Sometimes it's about being able to empower the individuals a little bit more so that the technicians are a little bit more autonomous. Um, a larger team isn't always a better team. Sometimes you want a smaller and leaner team where everybody is a bit more focused, or you sometimes it's an infrastructure problem. Um, you shouldn't like sometimes it is just investing in more storage, investing in higher bandwidth connectivity. Sometimes it is as trivial as that. But sometimes the solution to the problem is technical, and we as people, as a team that is kind of really comfortable with breaking the boundaries, um, it's just sort of a daily routine for us to say, well, I think this is a limitation with technology, and we can extend it in some way. So, take for example, we can modify the engine, we can extend the engine, or the tech stack. We can build something bespoke for this that solves the problem, and that's, I think, well, what we do, right? Like, as we are tool builders and we're problem solvers, and my job, I think, on the team really is to understand what the problem is and come up with the best solution. And if they are also technical, if the solution to it is technical in nature, then being able to unambiguously communicate it to the team. And also give them, I think the other really important thing is that we need to give them context for why that problem needs solving.
Yeah.
So why do we need to make this faster? Why do we need to reduce the memory footprint? Why do we need to, because people can be given a task and say, well, we need to reduce the memory footprint. And then they will be like, well, by how much? What's the trade-off? Like, is it acceptable if we spend more compute cycles to compress data? So we store data in the memory as a compressed format. And often a lot like problems have different solutions. There's a lot of different valid solutions to a problem. And being able to provide people with the right context gives them the ability to select the correct solution from all of the different candidates. And I think that's really my role, to understand the problem, to come up with a solution, and then if the solution is technical in nature, communicate the solution and the context, and have a open-ended discussion with the team, because you can be wrong. They may have a better idea.
Yeah.
You may be able to keep your cake and eat it too. Um, right.
Right. But
So
if you don't give them the context, then they will solve the literal problem you give them, and instead of going, oh, actually, okay, looking further into this, this is actually the problem, and maybe solving that before they come back to you.
yeah, and I think that just becomes like it's not purely, yeah, like it's an explorative process, and we run all of our development very much in this kind of exploratory process where we don't try. Sometimes there is a very clear solution to it, but a lot of the time the solution isn't quite as obvious as it seems, or maybe the most direct path to something isn't necessarily the best path.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, it's really, really interesting. So, can you tell us a little bit about some of the interesting problems that you're solving right now, or some of the things you've just solved, or what are you guys
Um,
working on?
like there's a few things we can't really talk specifically,
Yeah.
but sort of very broadly speaking, I think, and also for the audience, I hope you find this useful. Is that over the last few years, one of the things that I've noticed is um, virtual production has definitely kind of taken on a very particular shape around the LED virtual production. So these big LED volumes, well, LED volumes large and small, and then green screens and things like that. But I think sometimes we sort of lose sight of virtual production really is a broader family of technologies. Everything that virtualizes aspects of physical production, whether it's cinematography, actor performances, sets, and lighting, and so on. All of this is a component of virtual production. And so, in terms of like the most interesting problem that we've solved over the last while, I think it's really data management on set. And I know that I was just saying, well, there's a lot more to virtual production than LED walls. The most interesting problem that we have solved, I think, is the idea of getting data onto and off of the walls and being able to preserve all of the creative intentions of the modifications that were done to the virtual sets. And most importantly, being able to preserve as much of the data that we can, because it's there, right? The inside of these virtual production environments, we have precise knowledge over, just about everything. We have precise knowledge about, or even if we're not tracking them, there's the lights inside of the volume. We have volumes that have various camera and object tracking methods, but we don't really use them to their fullest.
Yeah.
And also a lot of the time, the modifications that were done on set to facilitate a particular creative intention. So the director wanted the sun to come from a different angle. They wanted a little bit more warmth in the shot. They want this object gone. They want this enlarged. They want this sort of depth relationship kind of broken up a little bit. They want this door to be a little bit wider, et cetera, et cetera. Like, being able to preserve these kind of creative intentions and make sure that they survive into post-production is really, I think, the most critical issue that we were trying to solve. And it comes in also through a really roundabout way, right? Because we, as someone that's kind of quite involved in the whole LED space fairly early on, the differences between shows that use it really well and was able to get away with minimal amount of post-production versus the ones that had to do a lot of post-production to make everything look correct, really comes down to sort of, well, it's not a single problem. It's a kind of several related problems. But ultimately, we were trying to figure out, how do we make people's life in post-production easier? So how can we save people's time to not have to like figure out what was done on set for a particular shot, so that they don't have to do all the guesswork to recreate it in post.
A lot of post-production people out there thanking you right now. Me being one. Who are like, why didn't they get it? Why didn't they just write it down? I'm like,
Exactly. But so it's a lot of things that, talking to people in post-production, they're like, oh, I can't believe I have to like rebuild this lighting from scratch. Like, we didn't get this, we didn't get that. So we had to do this and that. And just a lot of the stories from the trenches, we realized really stem from the fact that data that should have been tracked isn't tracked. But then once you get the context of why these things weren't tracked, it's because, well, there's a million and one things going on set all the time. And if you have to track, like if you need to add another person whose job is to track a specific thing, that's another person you have to manage, right? That's another chain in the process. And if one of it fails, like it takes everybody down with them, right? Or in the best case scenario, it's just a little bit annoying, or you just don't get the data. But in the worst case scenario, you take everybody down with you. So it's totally understandable that people are very conservative on set. They want to stick to what works. So whenever you try to track a new piece of data, it takes time for people to feel comfortable introducing a new piece of equipment or a new position, or a new piece in the pipeline, when you are sort of under that intense pressure. So what we realize is that, well, you can automate these things.
Mm.
So they just happen in the background without you needing to even worry about it. And so it's kind of like I feel people are conservative because they're trying to solve things in the old ways that they're being solved. And there are more intelligent approaches to all of this that allows you to track more things without really adding to the burden. Just by having better tools, it's really just that. Like, why chop wood with an axe when you can take a chainsaw to it?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it makes total sense. And I know this crystallizes into some products that you guys have built. So you want to talk about
I'll,
them at all, or anything that you can talk about?
I'll take this opportunity to like shamelessly plug this thing.
Please do.
So a lot of the learnings that we had over the last few years has crystallized into this new version of our tool called Beehive. So this is specifically Beehive 2, and by the time this recording is coming out, I think 2.1 will just be on the horizon. And we've introduced a lot of stuff that we learned from being a part of actual shows.
Mm.
And we've made it so that it's basically streamlines all of your on-set workflow. So the most labor-intensive components. So it basically handles all of your initial scene deployments. So being able to distribute all of the assets to the LED cluster, and it also manages all of your tracking as well. So this is version management. So all the modifications that you're doing to your world, whether you're importing new assets or just creating things from scratch directly on the walls, or just making small tweaks to the content on the wall, like everything in between. We will track every modification that you make automatically. We give you the ability to preserve sort of the scene states as it relates to every take of every shot without you ever having to stop and think about like what it is that you just did. And lastly, it's about being able to get that data out from this editing environment. So preserving the full context and making sure that everything survives into post-production. So that's really been the emphasis, is that we want to make people's life both on set and off as easy as possible. Like a lot of the things that we noticed took the most manual work, that were most error prone, or the most likely to kind of cause delays on
Mm.
set. We've made a lot of effort to make sure all of that is automated and streamlined.
Right. That's great. Well, I think, yes, thinking of revision control and transfer of data from one part of the pipeline to the other, and yeah, there's lots of things I've experienced personally in some of those environments that definitely slow things down and introduce things that you have to go back and check and bring people back to look at a scene again and say, are we sure we did this? Did we do it this way? That
Yeah,
kind
it's
of
like it
confidence.
doesn't look quite right. You know, like I swear for this particular take, the sun is like over there, or
Yeah.
like the grading options was like this, and yada yada yada. So yeah, there is a lot of that. I think that confidence of, did we actually do this, or am I looking at the right thing?
Mm.
That is sort of lost because like people either didn't have time to write them down, or they were lost in the intensity of the moment, or somebody just makes an honest mistake, or like the tool kind of screws up on you in the background. So all of these things are possible.
Yeah.
So what we're hoping is that we want to kind of present people with a sort of the right tool for the right job. And one of the things that we also kind of get asked a lot is how does Beehive work with Perforce, right? Because
Yeah.
Perforce is sort of the standard in terms of version management. Um, and a big part of that is sort of Perforce is great for a long-term project management, like version management for your whole project. So it will preserve like your entire project inside of it. Whereas like Beehive is really more like a scalpel. It is designed to do something very specific, which is to manage all of your changes and remember them in real time and allow you to kind of preserve the full creative context behind every edit. And then if you do need to kind of bring them into like long-term version management, you can either just take the data created by Beehive and put it into Perforce, or you can export them out from Beehive and put it into Perforce or ShotGrid or F-Track or whatever it is that you use for production management.
Yeah.
So we're trying to say we're not really replacing Perforce. It's just more that this is a tool that is designed specifically for this use case, and you can use it in a variety of different ways in combination with your existing tools and pipeline.
Right. So is it so yeah, makes sense. I mean, those things that you're talking about have a long history and they're good and but somewhat problematic in those crucibles, in those film sets. It can be performance-wise, speed-wise. You're asking people to do something, it's got to be pretty quick. If you've got a first AD in the corner looking angry and shouting at you, you want to get it done fast, and then maybe take care of some other parts of that once the shoot is wrapped, and you can, yeah, that makes sense. Are you guys using your own formats? Are you leveraging other scene formats, only open source? Anything that you obviously that you can say about that?
So we can talk a little bit about sort of at the moment. So when we first started on this journey, we weren't very proficient with USD. So it's early on. I think in the life cycle, people haven't really caught on to USD as a proper standard. I know, like on Lion King, it was like you guys an early adopter, right?
Yeah.
On Lion King.
Yeah, it was really tough.
Yeah, they're like it is tough, and I think it really took many years of people kind of wrapping their head around what it is. And I think even to this day, I think different people still have very different ideas of how USD should work. And the best way I can really articulate it is that it's a data description language. It really isn't just a file format. It is a way to describe data. It is a way to non-destructively edit data. And so to that question, so Beehive began without the awareness of USD.
Right.
But because we were trying to make them cross-platform in cross-application, so it began as a collaboration tool. But it did more than, it was kind of Omniverse before Omniverse.
Yeah.
We initially developed it to solve a problem where people are starting to look at virtual sets inside of virtual reality. But the directors, they didn't want to modify the world themselves. They want to tell somebody to modify the world for them.
Right. Yeah.
So they wanted to be able to talk to a virtual art department artist to say, all right, move that mountain over there, or make that taller and make that shorter. They want to be able to point and then something happens, like they do with the physical art department, right?
Yeah.
So at the time, we developed this collaboration framework that allowed for that. But then we realized this would have been in 2016. And then there was sort of like a shortage of people with knowledge of Unreal Engine in the industry. So there's a lot of people with Maya experience. So what we then did was we expanded that collaboration framework to also encompass different applications. So the moment we realized we need to do cross-application, non-destructive edits, we naturally started going down a path that had a convergent evolution with USD.
Okay.
So Beehive didn't start using USD, but we are in the process of making it work much more closely with USD. Because I think fundamentally we're trying to address the same issues. The other technology that we have a lot of interest in is Open Asset IO.
Okay.
And we're kind of looking to see how people want to use it, because as a unimplemented API, in theory, it's just a standard. It's a lingua franca for if I want to tell a application to create an object, there is now a standard way to tell the object to do this thing. But I think tell the application to do this thing, to perform an operation, to move this thing, to import it, to export it. But I think the adoption is not quite as universal for us to really embrace it. But super long-winded answer to a simple question. We're currently really focusing on USD-based interoperability.
But not being dependent on USD. USD being like essentially kind of an option in a way.
Yeah, so it's kind of like USD in, USD out. While we will also have like our own secret sauce in terms of being able to preserve application-specific data. Because take, for example, like there's no straightforward way to, say, represent a Niagara particle system inside of USD.
Right.
Or like a Houdini graph inside of USD. But what we're working on is that there is a way to do that. Maybe other applications couldn't understand it. Like Maya wouldn't be able to understand a Niagara particle system. Houdini wouldn't be able to understand, say, like what would be a good example? Like a dynamically created blueprint actor or something like that, a procedural blueprint actor. But they are able to at least understand enough of what these things are to make it relevant, so that you're not just staring at a blank canvas, so to speak. That if you were to work, if someone in Maya was to work with someone in Unreal, they were able to see the things that they both understand.
Right.
Without really needing this whole process of import export. It's just like they're all looking at the same thing, but just having a slightly different view on the data. And I suppose that's kind of where things are really, really different, is that Beehive really tackles this collaboration, interoperability, and management as a very data-centric solution. And that's why we're able to very quickly extend it to work with a LED cluster, because each of the LED cluster really is just sort of like a runtime world that are centrally managed, and then they need to share the same view and the same data.
Right. Wow, it sounds very cool.
Yeah.
And is there are there ways to try this out currently? It's available to buy right now, or how would somebody go about checking it out?
So this will be available on our website as a trial. We also have a support team who is very dedicated to kind of helping you to onboard you to the technology. And as a matter of fact, like sometimes if you need someone to be kind of helping you out in person, like I might be the one that show up depending on which part of the world you're in. But it is something that we're starting to roll out, or we have actually, by the time this airs, a few stages around the world will already be using this to deliver productions. So some of our early partners will be doing this.
Fantastic. And how's you have a suite of tools, so how's Dragonfly?
So Dragonfly has been really interesting. For us, it kind of evolved in ways that we sort of kind of anticipated, but also didn't anticipate at the same time. I know it's a bit weird. So Dragonfly really was developed kind of fundamentally as a way so for people who are not at all proficient inside of Unreal Engine to be able to do visual cinematography. And that's how it was originally developed. Like every piece of every functionality that you would want to use, you can just access it directly in the tool. You don't really have to be an expert in Unreal to do it. But where that kind of evolved was that it turned, like, what we realized is it helped people introduce visual cinematography into their pipeline very quickly, because initially you first have to overcome the hurdle of like learning Unreal and then learning about virtual cameras inside of Unreal, assuming that you already have a foundation in virtual production. But now it's kind of like you don't really need to know Unreal although knowing Unreal helps, but not needing to know about it makes it even quicker for teams to adopt. And it also allows people who didn't have an Unreal background to also meaningfully contribute to the team very quickly. So that's
Yep.
one thing. The other is sort of how it's like a convergence of what we've been doing inside of Beehive. So I talked about like real-time version management as a core capability of Beehive. But what we now are kind of moving towards is kind of like combining these two tools in such a way that we now have scenes that are driven by your your edits rather than the other way around. So one of the things that we found a lot of people struggle with is if you needed to make modifications to a specific shot, and this is shared by both people doing pre-visualization, animation, games, and people doing virtual production, is that you may be making tweaks to individual shots to make something look better. Making lighting tweaks, material tweaks, color tweaks. You may be adding a light to a particular shot, but you don't want this modification to kind of bleed over into all the other shots that you have already done.
Right.
So that was so we now combine the two tools such that you're able to make per shot modifications that only lives within that shot. It's not going to bleed over into other shots unless you want to.
Got it.
So this is a way that it has kind of evolved in ways that we didn't quite expect. Is that we're now really coming in and say we're changing how people work inside of Unreal Engine, where you have more like almost like an edit-driven workflow. Your primary tool to interact with Unreal is now more through your sequence than through your level.
Right. But you're also, I know, developing this to be connectable to anything, should anything else become the flavor of virtual production. Unreal's the king at the moment for sure. But this is something which will work with multiple platforms.
Correct. So we built in like all our technology, we built it to be kind of application agnostic. And so the core functionality lives external to the applications. And that's why we're able to support Maya and Unreal. And also there's a few other integrations that are going to happen over the course of this year. So really kind of pushing the availability of this tool to kind of a wider audience.
That's very cool. Yeah, and so once you've learned it, you don't have to relearn it if it appears in another software. You are exposed to the interface, which is common among all the programs. That's very cool.
There's some idiosyncrasies, some minor differences, like certain
Right.
applications can do things that other applications couldn't. But yeah, absolutely. It's a big part of kind of what we do.
I have to ask about NASA, seeing as you mentioned them at the beginning. So there was some part of the genesis of Glassbox, I think, if I'm not wrong. What did you do with them, and how did that kind of play out?
I know we don't have much time, so I'll be brief.
Yeah, no problem.
So that
we
was
can go over a few minutes if we need to. It's okay.
Okay. So at the time, this would have been 2014 or 2015. So we developed the integration with the Connect. So this is the very earlier versions of Unreal 4. Was it Unreal 4 at the time? Yeah, Unreal. This would have been the very, very beginning of Unreal 4. And then so we had the Oculus, the HD prototype. It's not even the DK2 at the time. And then we combined it with Connect-based input. So we created a game that you play basically with your body called Earthlight. And it was a tech demo to showcase that not only are we able to integrate these like disparate tech stacks, so virtual reality and natural user interface, we're also able to really push the rendering to its limits because of our experience with the game engine. So at the time, we actually published, you could probably still find this on Reddit. It's on our space. We published a few renders that were captured in games, and they were so realistic, people initially couldn't tell them apart. And then
Oh,
that's how we got in touch with some of the folks at NASA that was really interested in kind of how we did it. And so that turned into a longer relationship where um, we collaboratively explored uses of like civilian virtual reality technology for different parts of NASA, who are they are absolute experts in virtual reality, but they're new to this new generation of virtual reality.
mm, yep,
So we had a hand in kind of helping them overcome some of that initial barrier, and sort of share with them sort of the learnings that we had, and they share with us some of the explorative efforts that they had put into this technology. So some of the things that they did were extraordinary. Like they had a in order to have like a wider field of view, they had two Oculuses bolted to their head, right? So each of the headset was for one eye. Um, this is from like the really early days when the whole thing had like a single display panel. So it was not the
yeah.
production version at all. This is like still the development kit days,
With more like
and
a
it was just
phone kind of screen, yeah, just one.
yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah, so they had two phone screens to each of their eyes, and then because they knew how to do like perspective match rendering, they knew how to do all this warping with matched optics and all that kind of stuff. So they were doing stuff that were like unimaginable,
right.
but at the same time, they didn't really know a lot about game engines. They didn't
Mm,
really know how to talk to game engines. For them, that's a whole new thing. And I think we just played a small part in kind of helping them sort of get a bit more hands on with this new tech.
right. No, very cool. Yeah, I mean, cool company or cool organization to work with. I have the fortune of working with them as well at the moment, doing something related. But yeah, that's really cool. I also just before we wrap, I know you got into this whole thing because you're interested in technology and telling stories. And do you get the opportunity to tell stories still? Do you feel like that's still something you have itches to scratch?
I, I think everybody in this industry kind of have that itch to scratch from time to
Me
time.
too.
But
Yes, definitely.
I think that's sort of a little bit the difference between like doing something as a hobby, right? Like for me at the moment, um, sure, I have a story I want to tell, but I think I'm more focused on making sure other people can tell their story.
Yeah.
So that's what I think we as a company are really sort of the foremost objective is to empower other storytellers, so
Right.
that they could tell the story they want to tell. And personally, sure, like in the future, there's some like if the opportunity arises, I would love to be involved a bit more creatively in certain projects. But at the moment, I'm really kind of content in just kind of helping other people tell their stories better.
Awesome. Well, tip of the hat. I the same. I run a school, so definitely doing that more than telling my own stories too. And it's really rewarding getting to watch other people being able to achieve their goals. So I resonate with that a lot. Is there anything else that you want to share with our audience? Anything, anywhere that they can follow you, Glassbox, any other things that you want to mention to people?
Um, if you want to get in touch with us, email is really easy. And also, I'm reasonably active on most of the virtual production Facebook groups. There's quite a few out there now, but the few main ones, I pay attention to them. I basically look at every post that comes up. So if people ever want to kind of get in touch with me directly, feel free to kind of give me a holler on those groups. And yeah, I'll do my best to respond to them.
Awesome. Anything else to look out for from Glassbox?
Uh, I think yeah, this year will be interesting. We'll be doing quite a lot in the first half, and hopefully there will be a major announcement kind of towards the second half. We'll see, but there's a lot of exciting developments on our end that we look forward to sharing with you
Lots of activity in the beehive that will be announced at some point this year.
across all products. I think
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, makes sense. Yeah, cool. Well, it's been a real pleasure chatting with you, Norman. Thank you very much for your time. I really enjoyed it. And it's been really interesting to hear your perspective, not just on technology, but also creativity and the whole human side of things, which I think is often not talked about and is really a huge part to play in all of this because it's all being done by people. That was really interesting as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me on. I wasn't kind of expecting to share that aspect, but I think the question kind of took us there, and hopefully people find it useful.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's crucial, really, because the technology is being driven by people, and it's only as good, I think, as the teams and the support systems around that allow for that to be birthed. So I think it was interesting reading Ed Catmull's book about creativity and of how he transitioned from being more directly responsible for some innovation and engineering to then doing the same thing, creating a place where innovation could be born as opposed to just creating it himself. And
It's called Deep Work, was it?
that this was a different book. I think it was called Creativity Inc. was his
Okay.
book. It was about him really kind of moving on from being a direct technologist to running Pixar, basically, and that whole
I thought
adventure.
that name sounded familiar. It's the Catmull. Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
Ed Catmull.
yeah, it was cool. It was a really interesting book, and that goes into that. Excuse me, that idea quite a lot. The other one was Deep Work. That was really about a lot of those kinds of books are about one idea. They just spend 250 pages talking about it. But the interesting part with Deep Work was, but because we live in such an age of distraction and celebrating to some extent the outcome rather than the process, it's really talking about about the process, about how to focus and how to get time to spend meaningfully creating something. It's a good book.
No, I'll definitely look into it.
There's another one where he wrote called Digital Minimalism, which is about eliminating distractions that we've created, some of the ones we've created in the last 10 years, and basically freeing you up to do more deep work. Essentially, that's a big thing for him. You could tell he was a software engineer based in Bay Area somewhere. Obviously
No,
wanted more focused time.
I'll definitely look into all of them. I think it sounds pretty fascinating.
It's helped me. I've had post-it notes with quotes from it stuck on my computer screen, just like focus and deep work and just things like that, just to remind me, like, what am I doing? Am I just scrolling and some news feed for distraction, or do I need to be doing this? It's like, I guess a lot of it comes down to being conscious of what you're doing and trying to get back to the more meaningful things in your life, whether it's your family or your work or whatever it is. Yeah, cool stuff. Well, yeah, thanks again, Norman. I really, really appreciate it, and I hope we get to do more things together, and love to announce things for you as they come out and highlight the cool stuff that you guys are doing.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to being able to share more, and thanks for having me on.
You bet. You bet. Well, thank you also to our listeners. We will be back again in a couple of weeks with another episode. But this has been episode 41 with Norman Wang from Glassbox Technologies. And we are CG Pro. You can follow us at becomecgpro.com. We'll see you again in another couple of weeks. Take care.
Take care.